Welcome back to the Rain Race Podcast, or welcome if this happens to be your first episode.
True.
We're talking sports car races as we've done here, you and I, for the past 40-ish or so shows. This is our 89th show since I started the podcast back in 2018. We've been on and off a little bit here and there since then, but we're closing in on episode 100. We'll get to that some point this year.
Our centenary
episode.
Centenary.
We got there a lot quicker than the 24 Hours of Le Mans did, so we're okay in that regard, I suppose. We do have a double header race weekend to recap on tonight's episode. Of course, we had the WEC 6 Hours of Spa and the IMSA Tire Rack Monterey Sports Car Championship. I think I got that correct.
At WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. You can't forget that.
There you go. At WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, which we'll be getting to after the WEC recap. Also got a couple small pieces of news/rumors and then your questions at the end of the episode. Of course, if you're here for the first time live, you got a chat box on YouTube. You can ask us some questions and we'll try to hit some of those at the end of the show. I'm going to start things off here, Stu, talking about the 6 hours of Spa. Some of the talking points that I wanted to go over here. Again, we're sort of switching the format up a little bit on how we want to recap these races, not giving you the full rundown. It's Thursday at this point. You've had probably more than enough time to catch the highlights for both races if you haven't yet. One of the notes I wanted to discuss here off the bat, sort of the title of the episode, is how are you going to stop them at this point? Between Ferrari and Porsche right now in the WEC and in IMSA, how are you going to stop the two of them? We are 4 races into IMSA's WeatherTech Championship right now. This was the 3rd WEC race on the schedule. And if you're looking at the raw statistics to come out of the race, just the finishing results, you might think, let's just copy and paste the notes from Imola and from Long Beach for the most part, for at least the GTP hypercar ranks. But there is a lot more to sort of delve into there. But I think on raw pace alone, it's clear at this point, at least in the WEC, that Ferrari is truly in a league of their own on one lap pace. And they were also able to back that pace up with just strong race pace as well, which I suppose you can't necessarily say about one of the stronger manufacturers in IMSA, and we'll get to that in about 15-20 minutes here. I don't know. What do you think about this, Stu? We're 4 races in now. 3 races in the World Endurance Championship. We have seen Ferrari just leading the class right now in qualifying sessions, in the races. Looks like they're really able to control the races this year. And really a form that we haven't necessarily seen from them in the World Endurance Championship this strong previously.
Yeah. It's you know what you can say about this weekend. It wasn't as dominant for Ferrari as it has been in previous races. You know, the end results may say differently with the 1-2 finish, but let's remember that Alpine was breathing down the back of the number 50 Ferrari's neck right at the end of this race. It's not like they had completely checked out to, a minute lead or anything like that. They had to work for this one. Sure. We saw a number of manufacturers that were up and competitive at various points in the race. And while the result here does come up Ferrari yet again, it does seem like the gap wasn't as large at Spa as it has been at other races. And we can only hope that, going into the 24 Hours of Le Mans, if Ferrari were to win that race again, I hope that it's not because they dominate, but there's a good battle that goes along with it, whether it be with Porsche or with Alpine, Toyota. There's so many other good manufacturers here. And that, I think that was my big takeaway from this race is, maybe it was it evolved kind of into a 2-horse race, maybe between Ferrari and to a lesser extent Alpine. But there were a lot of, strong performances from some of the other manufacturers here. Even Cadillac, who had not a great qualifying effort. They did not look great necessarily coming into the race. They still pulled through with a 5th and a 6th place finish. So, a decent, a couple of cars in the points isn't something that they'll be complaining about, especially with how the season has begun. So, yeah, it's another Ferrari race, another Ferrari 1-2. Sorry, I meant another Ferrari race win, another 1-2, but I think this one was a little bit closer than some of our previous ones.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, wasn't as cut and dry as some of the other races in terms of just the raw pace they had. So you want to look at some of the other manufacturers who were up there this weekend. Alpine, you mentioned. I'd give a kudos to Mick Schumacher on that final stint. I think he did a great job at probably getting the most that he was able to out of that Alpine, which really was on old tires at that point. And perhaps not in a position to hold up with the Ferraris on ultimate pace. But that was a strong showing for Alpine. It was a strong showing for Peugeot as well. Perhaps if you want to go as far as saying on pace alone, maybe the best pace we've seen out of that car since the program started back in 2022. Strong in qualifying. They qualified P4, second fastest manufacturer behind the Ferraris. Ultimately, they sort of blundered this race away due to some poor strategy, let's be honest, on the 93 car. And then the 94 car about an hour later running into, really, I'll just call it unfortunate luck, contact with the number, which BMW was it? I made note of it. 20 BMW after the restart, with the safety car restart from the number 59 McLaren crash. I think going back to the issue with car 93, if you didn't see the race, they were in the top 5, made a strategy decision to stay out during the safety car intervention break for the number 95 McLaren. We'll talk about McLaren's poor weekend in a little bit here. Decided to stay out, get the race lead, get the track position, but critically, we're not really in a position where they would be able to make it to the end on one less pit stop than the others, or even the same number of pit stops as the others. And to me, it's just a misjudgment. You're not in a position at that point with a car as strong as it was this weekend on pace. I don't think they should have gone for a gamble. Maybe on a race weekend where you're well behind, you got to take some egregious strategy to try to find your way towards the front. That's the time to do it. This weekend, you have the pace. Settle for the top 5 if you can. I think that's probably what they should have done with car 93. Everything in hindsight is 2020, I suppose. But Jean-Eric Verne was pretty vocal over the radio on the strategy call that was made there after they lost all those positions. Ended up falling back to 16th during the next safety car period. And just had to work up through the field after that.
Yeah. Do you remember what happened to the sister car? I do.
Yeah,
not.
the 94 had contact with a BMW, the 20. They got suspension damage.
Yes. Yes.
Also, while they were up closing in on the top 5 as well. So it's, you just got to chalk that one up to being unfortunate. But ultimately, around the entire team, not a great result given how promising they looked going in. And sort of the opposite of what we've seen from them at some previous races where they're able to convert poor performance into a pretty decent race result. We'll talk about BMW as well, because they were another manufacturer. I had them as my pick to win this race, as one that I thought honestly would be a contender for the win. They didn't really have as much pace as I thought they would, to be honest. We're not down in the dumps by any means, but they certainly didn't have the pace to match. I would say the 3 favorites at this race were probably Ferrari, Alpine, BMW, or Peugeot, and then BMW maybe slightly behind them. Of course, you already talked about contact with car 20 on the 94 Peugeot. The interesting thing that got mentioned about BMW this weekend, I think, is mid-race, and I can't remember who said it, but it was mentioned that the BMW seems to struggle more on tire wear than some of their competitors. And I have to wonder, because we've discussed this in previous episodes, and why is BMW not able to convert these pole positions in IMSA over to race wins? Where is that shortcoming with the car? And you and I have sort of chalked it up to they're just not as strong on race pace. They can put together a qualifying lap. They can put together a pole performance, but they don't seem to be there over the course of a stint, certainly not to the extent that Porsche has been this year. And I thought that was a little bit interesting. Wanted to get some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This was the first race, the first weekend stateside in IMSA that it seemed like BMW they had that long run pace, because we saw, I don't, maybe it's more of the driver is they're not understanding how to unlock that long run pace, or because we saw Dries Vanthoor in the last stint of the Laguna Seca race. He was he closed a 14-second gap to the race leaders, from that final stint, and that was over the pace of the length of that run. So that really questions, did BMW maybe discover something? Did they just have a good setup for this weekend, or what that, what's going on there? But you're absolutely right. Like it definitely has given the impression over the course of the season to this point that BMW's long run pace wasn't anywhere close to what their short run pace was. And yeah, I don't know. It's after this weekend, maybe not so much on the WEC side, but on the IMSA side, it's brought more into a question if maybe they've discovered a little something that's going to help them for the rest of the season. And I don't know to the extent that WRT and RLL talk about these things, but if there's some data sharing that's going on, then maybe that could translate over to the WEC entries as well, especially going into a big race like Le Mans.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I was going to bring up later in the episode, and I'll talk about that more when we get into the IMSA race. I think there were other factors at play in helping the 24 catch back up to the Porsches this weekend at Laguna Seca. But certainly, like you said, they didn't struggle as much with that long run pace in IMSA this weekend than they did previous races. Now, you also can look at maybe even longer stints than that. Of course, when we're talking about the World Endurance Championship, we're talking about multiple stints on tires. We're talking a 6-hour race here versus a 2-hour and 40-minute race. Maybe that's where that starts to become a factor for the BMWs. But it's a trend I've noticed really starting this year, when we've started to see more one-lap pace out of the BMW. They're still just missing that race, that I'd say the pace to win a race in the World Endurance Championship, and to an extent in IMSA right now as well. And I've always been curious what that secret is for them. So if it's partially tire related, if it's fully tire related, I guess we have yet to tell. But I wanted to make a note of that, because I thought that was something that I was considering in the past. I also want to give an honorable mention, while I'm at it, to another drive that I thought was particularly strong this weekend in the hypercar category. I mentioned Mick Schumacher in his final stint. You got to give kudos to Nicolas Nielsen as well in the 50 Ferrari. Tasked for the second time now in a year with saving energy towards the end of a race. Of course, the last big one being the 24 Hours of Le Mans last year, where I think he crossed the line on 2% energy remaining for that historic win. Here, crossed the line with a registered 0% of energy remaining. And ultimately, that's the difference that was able to get them a second place finish. If he had to come in for a splash at the end of the race, certainly would have lost second place to that 36 Alpine, and likely dropped further down the order as well. I just think his ability in those clutch moments to save energy when it's required and keep that car to the pits, because I got to tell you, that entire final stint from essentially 1 hour of the race to go onwards, I was expecting that 50 car to have to come in for a quick splash at the end. Didn't have to do it, and that's really what made the difference. And when you're talking about a championship run, I know Ferrari's kind of in a league of their own right now, but when you're talking about a championship versus your sister car, in the car 51, or if you want to look at the 83 car as well, I know they had a poor race weekend at Spa. That sort of took them out of the points hunt a little bit. But those are the differences that are going to stack up at the end of the season. So definitely wanted to give a kudos to Nielsen for that drive. And I think the final point I want to make here from Spa is this was really a catch-up race weekend for some of those LMGT3 teams in the championship standings. I mentioned in our preview show last week that I thought this was going to be, just based off the first couple practice sessions we saw, that this was going to be a race weekend that favored some of the manufacturers that weren't quite so strong in the opening 2 rounds of the season. And to a point, we saw that. I know Porsche was stronger than I expected they would be. TF Sport really were struggling all weekend from a pace standpoint. But this was a weekend that some of those other teams were able to capitalize on. The 21 Vista of course, of Ferrari, of course, finishing the race with a win, rebounding from Imola where they had to retire. Sister car number 54, they rounded off the podium, and that bumps them up to 5th place in the championship. You can look further down the order in the championship standings at the 2 Mustangs, who had a poor start to the season as well. Of course, a fiery start to the season over in Qatar. They were 15th and 16th in the standings after the first 2 races, finished 2nd and 4th here. That bumped them up to 10th and 11th. And then if you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, TF Sport Corvettes, as I said, poor weekend from them, and the championship leading number 33 car finished outside of the points here at Spa and really brought the others in contention there a little bit. So different story that we're seeing in the LMGT3 class compared to the hypercar ranks right now. This was a big 180 weekend for some of those teams for the better, and then some for worse as well.
Yeah, and one of the teams that you didn't mention there, or manufacturers you didn't mention there, who looked like they were going to be on for another solid weekend was Lexus and Akotis ASP. They showed some strong pace. I don't remember quite where they qualified, but I do remember them looking quite strong. One of the cars ultimately did not finish the race. The 87, and then the sister car, the 78, was only able to muster an 8th place finish. But a very, very competitive class LMGT3 is, and they looked like it was an opportunity for them to continue gaining on some of the leaders, and just weren't quite able to capitalize on it this weekend.
I'm going to bring this back to one final point, because I think the main idea with this episode is answering the question of, can Ferrari and Porsche be stopped in the hypercar category / GTP over in IMSA? If you look at the next race, of course, we're going to Le Mans. This is a race where Ferrari is 2 on the trot right now. And there's one thing I've picked out of that Ferrari 499P, which is that it's a very, very good low drag car. Very quick on the straightaways. They actually didn't have, if you look at raw numbers for balance of performance, they didn't have what some would say is the strongest car this weekend. Just looking at the BOP tables. But nonetheless, they're a very strong car when it comes to these higher speed circuits. They've been strong at Spa in the past before. Let's not forget they were probably on track to win this race last year, I think it's fair to say. They were strong pace-wise here on their opening year in 2023 as well. And then, of course, look at Le Mans the past 2 years and how strong they've been there as well. You have to imagine they're going to be a top contender at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in a few weeks' time. Whether they're able to convert that into 3 race wins in a row for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and then a 4th on the table this year in the World Endurance Championship, I got to be honest, Stu, I don't think they're going to be out of it. Unless we see a dramatic balance of performance change that really
Yeah.
just excludes any chance that they have whatsoever. They've got 3 cars going into the race next year. I was going to say next year. Next 3 weeks from now. No, sorry, 4 weeks from now, or 30 days out today, actually.
True.
I think they're going to be a contender there. I really do. And stopping them after that, maybe then you can start bringing that conversation up. But
Yeah.
for Le Mans, I'd certainly be surprised if they're not in the picture.
Yeah, I think, we're 3 races into the season at this point. You have to expect that Ferrari is going to be very competitive at Le Mans, regardless, as you alluded to, of any BOP changes that we see. They are going to be in the conversation throughout the entirety of this race. And it's the real question that we're going to have to answer in the lead up to Le Mans is who is the manufacturer, who is the team that can put up the best fight. And there's a reasonable argument to be made for probably, 3, 4, 5 manufacturers that could reasonably do that. So I think from us as from a fan perspective, I hope that we have a really good discussion going in to Le Mans week on, who is going to be there to dethrone Ferrari in this race.
Yeah. I'm going to leave it at that for now. We've got plenty more to discuss for the 24 Hours of Le Mans in our preview show, which is coming in a few weeks' time here. But we'll save that for another day. I do want to keep the wheels turning here, as long as you have nothing else to discuss from Spa.
No?
We can fly this plane across the Atlantic and across the United States all the way out to sunny Monterey for the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Challenge race there, where, again, we're talking about the 4th race win in a row for Porsche Penske Motorsport. Gonna ask the question again. Can we stop them?
Oh boy. After we just come off talking about Ferrari and the dominance that they've shown. It may be arguably even more impressive the dominance that Porsche has shown in IMSA. Everything that pops up in that championship with late race full course yellows, really turning a race on its head within, the final hour of a race. Just the unique circuits that the series has gone to so far, Daytona, Long Beach, Sebring, and now Laguna Seca. The length of they've won everything. They've won everything that's been thrown their way. And it hasn't necessarily been a cakewalk in many of these races. BMW has been very competitive along the way. Obviously Porsche have been very strong, and they proved it once again this weekend. They may have not had the quickest 1-lap pace. There's an argument to be made that they maybe didn't have the quickest long run pace. But they did everything right in this race. They played, the undercut that they played for the first pit stop is I think the moment that, that's looking back, what really won them the race. Being able to, BMW was looking comfortable after the first stint. They played the undercut, were able to get out ahead and build up a healthy lead in that second stint. And then that really afforded them, the luxury of that gap coming home for the final stint of that race, being able to manage equipment, being able to maybe not take as heavy risks in traffic that they may have had to if that gap hadn't been as large, and really put up a strong middle stint of the race that I think ultimately won them the race. Now, one of the takeaways that you had noted, and I think is a glaring one coming out of this weekend, was the lack of pace, particularly in my eyes from Cadillac, but also it should be noted from Acura as well. We're at the point now, we are 4 races into the season. Cadillac is running 3 cars in GTP and have for every round, and they have yet to secure a podium. I believe I don't know what their best finish has been. I thought their best finish may have been 5th, but I could be wrong on that. But regardless, Cadillac, whether it be the Action Express Racing one or the Wayne Taylor Racing Cadillacs, have yet to secure a podium this year. And, considering the strong start that they got out to last year, I think many people were expecting, the additional Cadillac being on the grid and the strong team that they have running it in Wayne Taylor Racing was going to bring some better results in the early going. And, that hasn't been the case. They've shown glimpses of some pace, but it has been nowhere close to that of BMW, of Porsche, and even at times of Acura. I mean, let's not forget Acura had the Rolex 24 been the Rolex 24 in 5 minutes, we very well might be talking about Acura on the having picked up a win in Meyer Shank Racing's first race back. So I think those are the biggest takeaways from GTP. Was there anything else that you saw in the race that in addition to Cadillac and Acura's sort of lack of pace?
Yeah, there's quite a bit, to be honest with you. I'll start off. So Cadillac, they finished fourth with a 31 car at Sebring and at Long Beach.
Okay.
I had to look that up. I'm not that smart.
I knew you were looking that up, so I was like, okay, save me on that one.
What I'll say, yeah, it's a surprise to me that they're not in the picture. I certainly thought they were going to be at Laguna Seca. We've seen Cadillac be very strong. I'd say historically they've been the second strongest manufacturer behind Porsche at this race in the past.
Yeah.
And it's another race where they're really not in the conversation.
At all.
And
they
that's
all got lapped.
The main takeaway I have here is that it's been many races now where, I say many, we're like 2 races, where 2 to 3, depending on how strong you look at Sebring, where we're not really even talking about Cadillac and Acura.
Yeah.
I know Acura, they picked up a podium at Sebring, and they picked up that second place finish at Daytona. Like you said, we're potentially on for a chance at the win there. But they're not carrying that strength. And particularly, I'm surprised about Wayne Taylor Racing. I sounded like a damn broken record at the start of the season, before the season got underway, and ever since this whole thing was announced last year, that when Wayne Taylor Racing went back to Cadillac and when Meyer Shank Racing went back to Acura, that we were going to see both of those manufacturers return to form. 4 races in now, we really haven't quite seen that.
Yeah.
I suppose you can make a small argument for Meyer Shank Racing, but Sans Daytona, they haven't really been in contention for the win anywhere. I'm sure that's all due to change at some point, but to me, that's a complete 180 to what I was expecting going into this season. I also want to talk about BMW a little bit more here. I think you brought up a good point. I forget exactly how you worded it with the undercut from Porsche in this race, but sort of alluded to the fact that Porsche were able to control the race here after that undercut that got them the race lead and actually got them into a 1-2. That to me is the main takeaway from BMW this year, is they're not able to control races. The 25 car, yes, I know they were up near the front at the start of Long Beach. They weren't able to convert that really into anything after the, I would say, first and only pit stop of that race. And the 24 car has really been putting themselves on the back foot during races where, whether you want to argue they had stronger race pace than Porsche in that final stint or not, were ultimately in that position where they had to play catch up. They haven't shown a race this year where they've been able to control the rest of the field. They certainly haven't been able to control Porsche. And I think that's where Porsche really has everybody else beat this year. Let's not forget, this was not just another race win for Porsche. This was another 1-2 for Porsche.
Yeah.
And we'll get into in a few minutes here whether or not they should have really had a 1-2 in this race. But the result stands that this is the third 1-2 in a row for Porsche. And the worst finish they've had between both of those cars this year for that factory effort is third at Daytona.
100% podium rate.
Unbelievable consistency that we've seen from them this year. And what that second car is able to do, maybe not quite as much here at Laguna Seca, where I think it maybe hurt the sister car. But in general, they're able to control that race lead. They're able to use that second car as a blocker to hold back the charge of any other manufacturer who's coming up against them. And they've done that really well this season. I think that defense that we saw from the 6 car at Daytona was probably the difference between Acura winning that race and not winning it. Just having that small buffer in there is enough to make the difference there. Porsche has been on top of the game when it comes to control of those races this year. And I think BMW, if there's one area they need to improve as a team, without necessarily having any changes to the car, is they need to get better at controlling races. And so far, we haven't seen that from them this season. And I think if they can convert the raw pace that they've had on one-lap qualifying speed out to races that they're able to control from the start and not be playing on offense, maybe we'll start to see the results turn from them.
Yeah, it was really a weird one, like from BMW's perspective. I mean, I said it in my recap and it was, I didn't feel like BMW, like in the moment, I didn't feel like BMW blew it. I wasn't expecting the undercut to be quite as strong as it ended up being. And like, if we were to compare like everything else, the amount of time that was spent on pit road between the cars was virtually the same. It was just that strategy decision by Porsche to play that undercut. They clearly knew that was going to be the play. BMW didn't seem to want to, try and, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not negate that, but split their strategy play and kind of cover that off. Yeah. And that, like you said, that was really the difference maker in the race, which just another tough one for BMW, but just another virtually perfect race by Porsche, maybe with the exception of a couple of moments of contact. There was contact made with one of the Lamborghinis earlier in the race, and we thought that, I think it was the 6, they slowed for about 10 seconds. And you wonder, like, was there a problem with the car? But, a masterclass by Porsche once again. One of the things that you had mentioned there, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is you were talking about Wayne Taylor Racing and Meyer Shank Racing, 2 teams that are either, jumping back into the IMSA mix this year in the case of Meyer Shank Racing, or have switched from another GTP manufacturer in Wayne Taylor Racing. If you are BMW right now, and there are a lot of rumors swirling about what the future of RLL might be with that program, do you think that they're seeing some of these returns from manufacturers that have changed teams and that's playing into their mind with a potential BMW decision over the summer? Or do you think that, it's just other factors? And yeah,
it's definitely something you have to consider. I know like Chip Ganassi Racing was even one of the teams that was sort of thrown up as a rumor for potentially taking over that BMW program. Again, this is all still in the rumor mill for now.
Yeah.
So, if you want to look at a team who, I was going to say, if you want to look at a team who has experience, but you can't discredit Rahal's experience in the category by any means. They're
and with race the car. Winning.
Yeah, of course. They're a race winning team with that car. And so far this year, they've shown that they're able to get pace out of it. It's just they haven't been able to execute it quite to the same ability as Porsche. And again, I don't want to just put all the weight on them. I've said this before that, sure, BMW hasn't been able to stack up against Porsche this year, but neither has anybody else. And if you want to look at the best of the rest, BMW has almost consistently been the best of the rest this year, with a couple exceptions.
They're 3rd and 4th in the championship right now.
Right. But ultimately still a long way back on the 2 Porsches. So I wouldn't be rushing to change if I were BMW, to be honest with you. I don't necessarily know if switching, especially if switching to, another manufacturer who's already in the championship, which I don't think is what you were going for. But I don't know. I don't see really what more they can do at this point in time from the team standpoint, other than what I've already said. And bringing on a different team to sort of run operations there, I don't really know if that would improve things.
Yeah, that's spot on. It's like this was a track that was bad for BMW the first two seasons. You know, they had shown pace at some other tracks the first couple of seasons of existence for the M Hybrid V8, but Laguna Seca was a particularly bad one. And you know, whether you want to attribute some of it to BOP, whatever you want to attribute it to, there's absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, you have to acknowledge that BMW took a huge step forward, not only at this track this year, but at every track that they have visited to this point. And you have to acknowledge that a huge part of that is RLL, that, you know, behind that program. And I with every race result where BMW is consistently in the hunt, you know, 4 poles in a row, like, come on, that's impressive on its own. And I know it hasn't come with any, you know, race wins yet, but that's still an impressive stat to have sort of, you know, in your book. So I think with every race that goes by, it's harder and harder to see BMW moving away from RLL. Maybe there's going to be a microscope that's kept on them, but at this point, I think it's very clear that they have been the best of the rest by a solid margin, only trailing Porsche.
Sure. I definitely think that's fair to say. I do want to talk about, of course, while we're talking about BMW, let's talk about that last lap incident.
Oh boy.
We can't escape it.
No.
Let's talk about sort of the lead up to it at first here. The 24 actually had a very interesting strategy that race where, correct me if I'm wrong, but Dries Vanthoor started the car, Philipp Eng got in for the middle, and then Dries got back in for the end of the race.
Yep. What was even more interesting about that is I was looking at the B Pillar report after the race, and I'm pretty sure Philipp Eng was the fastest over the course of their stints. He was. So that was very interesting to me. But let's continue.
Yeah. So we talked about sort of, did BMW have the ultimate race pace here? Were they the favorites on race lap pace compared to the Porsches here? Dries Vanthoor, of course, put in that great final stint to reel in that lead. Now, I don't know how heavily Porsche were really racing each other, but they certainly weren't handing it to each other at the end of this race. And I think that's probably what attributed, partially at least, to the 24 getting back in the fight here, was the fact that the two Porsches weren't running in a line 1-2 without any sense of team orders. With complete control based on team orders. There was really no sense of team orders we saw from that team in that final stint here. I think that's a contributing factor to the 24 catching up, along with the fact that Dries was just showing pretty strong pace from the BMW.
There was a lot of traffic that the 6 was dealing with as well. You know, when you're the lead car, when he caught the 40 Cadillac, I think it was, like, they put up a big fight to try and stay on the lead lap, and that definitely backed them up a good bit. Yeah.
And then, of course, you get to the final lap where these 3 cars are pretty much running nose to tail. We talked about 10, 15 minutes ago about how strong Porsche is at controlling races this year. Having those cars 1-2 and that final lap certainly did help them here. But ultimately, you come with a couple of corners left in the race. You got a mano-a-mano between Nick Tandy was in the 7 car at the time, Dries Vanthoor was in the 24. And coming out of the second to last turn, you've got the Pfaff Lamborghini out on the left side of the track. You've got the 7 Porsche behind him, and you've got the 24 BMW right behind them, making a quick move out to the right to try to use the Pfaff Lamborghini as a pick. You had a great analysis of everything that sort of went down there in your video, where you sort of mentioned that how can you put the blame on the 24 for this at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I really agree with that 100%, because if you want to play devil's advocate and say, I'm in Lawrence, sorry, not Lawrence Vantor's shoes, I'm in Nick Tandy's shoes here. He's trying to block me behind the Lamborghini and make sure I have nowhere to go. That's endurance racing. That's multi-class endurance racing at its heart right there. And
Traffic
there's absolutely nothing wrong with the 24 trying to do that. I saw some people try to put the blame on the FAF Lamborghini, saying they were moving out to the right side of the track. They should have held to the inside. GT cars not at responsibility to get passed cleanly by the prototypes. It's always at the prototype's discretion. So I don't put any blame on them either. IMSA ultimately ruled this one as a racing incident. You seemed a bit to disagree with that a bit in your race review video. And I'll tell you, I feel pretty much the same way here. I would really put 100% of the blame on the 7 car here. And there's two things that really come out of this, two positives if you want to look at it. Number one for the 24 being that those 3 cars had such a strong lead that it didn't really affect the 24 car in the race results. Now, with how far off track they were thrown there in that final corner, had this been a late race restart, easily could have thrown them outside the top 5. And the other positive you can take out of this really is that the FAF Lamborghini wasn't affected during any of this. They were on for a strong run themselves in the GTD Pro class. But I got to tell you, it's a little bit disheartening, I suppose. Maybe not the right word to use here, but I wish IMSA would take action on some of these moves when they are seemingly cutthroat. They seem to chalk things up to racing incidents, probably more than they should. And you and I have discussed this before on a couple of different occasions, at least, where it can come down to a final couple-hour championship battle in the case of Petit Le Mans a couple of years ago, where the championship ends in tears, and they're calling this a race incident. They call Laguna Seca finish a race incident. To me, that's something where, yeah, maybe the 7 car should have had a post-race time penalty applied to them. I certainly would have loved to have seen a dash to the line, which is probably what would have ended up happening here.
Yeah.
If that contact didn't happen. But that's just the way I look at it. I want to get some more of your thoughts. I know you gave a proper overview of it in your review video. But should IMSA have taken more action on the 7 car, given the fact that they were probably at full responsibility for that incident?
Yeah, I'm 100% of the belief that the 7 is, there were factors that came into this that led into the 7, making the moves. But I firmly believe that the 7 was fully responsible for the incident and should have received a penalty for it. You mentioned it there that, the 7 got caught in behind the Lamborghini, the FAF Lamborghini. And coming out of, I think it was there's 11 turns at Laguna Seca. So coming out of turn 10, Tandy just, he made a mistake. He made a mistake in leaving the door open at all for Vantor there. And the 24 took it. They took that little bit that they could get and took that opportunity to try and block the 7 in behind the slower GT car. They, there was plenty of comments on the, I talked about this in my video. There were plenty of comments about it. Well, you have to leave space. Well, yes, you do have to leave a lane on the racetrack. You do not have to leave space as a driver to come out and navigate around a slower class car. If you are stuck in behind that car, if you are blocked in behind that car, then that's tough beans. You, in this instance, Tandy put himself in that situation. You've made your bed at this point. But in that moment, there was evasive action that was made by Tandy. This probably doesn't happen if it's not the last lap of the race. Made that initial move, that swerve out from around the Lamborghini, made pretty decent contact with the 24 in that moment, and essentially made his room going into the corner. You mentioned that the Faf Lamborghini was present there. It's the reason why I got all the Faf gear out tonight. Gotta show my support for Faf, because really they did nothing wrong. People look at that and they're arguing, oh, the Faf Lamborghini moved to the right. They moved to the right. They squeezed the Porsche. If you go and look at it, if you slow it down and look at it, the Porsche made contact with the BMW before they made contact with Faf. Yes, sure, Faf was moving over to the right, which was the natural racing line coming out of turn 10 into turn 11. They're completely entitled to that racing line. It is the responsibility of the quicker class cars to safely navigate around the slower traffic. And it's not like Faf did anything, the Lamborghini did anything egregious in this moment. There was room. I don't think they would have expected that, they were going to throw it 3 wide into a very tight final corner. And also, let's not forget that, Faf had a Corvette that they were racing for the final podium spot. At the beginning of that final lap, they were 3/4 of a second behind the Corvette. Now, I didn't get a good view of what the time difference was with them on that final lap, but 3/4 of a second, while it's unlikely in that final lap, if the Corvette makes a mistake, goes wide coming out of that final corner, you can easily make up 3/4 of a second on a little bit of a mistake. So Faf isn't going to just push on the brakes and go, yeah, you know what, you guys go on by. There's still a race that's going on there. So the second contact with the BMW was really the nail in the coffin for me of, this is a penalty. And it's not even because of the result of the incident. Like, at what point, like, what's the message that we're sending here? If that's not a penalty, are we not just encouraging, drivers to push one another off the track when they're side by side with somebody on the final lap of a race? Like, that's not the racing that we want to see. That's not the racing that the drivers want to compete in. And I was really surprised that it wasn't a penalty, considering some of the stuff that we've seen called penalties so far this year. But, I don't know. Like, if you're in BMW's shoes, like, you still walk away with a 3rd and a 4th place finish. But how much more of a fire can you light under these guys? I guess, like, you got to think going into Detroit, if they're in a battle with Porsche, like, there's not going to be any space that's afforded to the either of the Porsches in that situation.
Well, and Detroit was not a clean race last year by any standards at all. So
Nope.
We want to set the bar high here on racecraft with the calls that they're making over in the stewards room. Then yeah, maybe we didn't quite get that this weekend.
Yeah, the drivers meeting might be an interesting one for Detroit. That's for sure.
Yeah. I do think everything you said there is bang on. It's all about setting a standard, and I think you need to put the fact that this was a last lap aside. Now, look, I can certainly see from Tandy's standpoint, this was not. I wouldn't go anywhere and say this was an intentional move by Tandy to take out the 24 car. This was premeditated. Absolutely not. Yep. But to me, the blame still falls on him, and you're echoing the same point. And the fact that IMSA doesn't go ahead and penalize something like that, I think sets a poor precedent for the future of not only can you sort of push your competitor off track and get away with it and get the better position in the race finishing results, but it also shows that you can sort of ignore the impact that GT cars have on your race. And if a GT car is holding you up in a corner, you can dive out of your lane and affect somebody else's race. And to me, that's really not what we're talking about here with multi-class racing. That's not the purpose of multi-class racing. So you and I are already on the same page here.
This could have been a huge accident. Like, let's not forget that was it Porsche last year that punted an Aston Martin bumped an Aston Martin into the pit road entry, the sand barrels.
I can't
I
remember
think
who it was last year.
there was it Magnus. It might have been Magnus last year, and I think it was one of the Porsches that gave them a bump here. But regardless, like there is, if Tandy in this moment makes an ever so wrong move and clips the back of the Faf Lamborghini here, that could be a massive accident. And we can't have that behavior sort of being encouraged here. It was Andretti in 2023. Thank you, Samuel. Yes, I knew it was similar similar kind of situation there, trying to navigate around lap traffic.
Yeah.
I think we've talked enough about that incident, though.
Yep.
There's a couple of other things I want to touch on very quickly from Laguna Seca. In GTD Pro, it was a solid race that we saw unfold here. It ultimately ended with a second GTD Pro victory in a row for, in this case, Roxy. Third win in a row for AO Racing when you factor in their Long Beach class win as well. But Ferrari looked very strong in the early going in this race. Dragon Speed bolted out to an early lead. And they were able to still hold on for a second place finish, but good showing from Ferrari there in another good GTD Pro race. GTD also offered us a solid battle as well. A lot of different comers and goers in this one. Ultimately, at the end, we had the 57 Windward Racing Mercedes win it, which meant that the same three cars won this year as they did last year. If my reading is correct, but a solid race there, and an interesting strategy call from Korthoff Competition in this one. They opted to start their pro driver and in that car that's Kenton Cook. And Cook transitioned over to Seth Lucas. This was a planned strategy play. They were hoping it was going to go green so they could take advantage of building out a lead at the beginning of this one. They ultimately just came up short of the podium, but I wanted to mention that. I think Laguna Seca was there was no full course yellows in this race. And maybe removing sort of that incident at the end, I thought it was a fun race to watch, seeing how the strategy unfolded, lots of comers and goers, sort of, especially in the GT classes. We had some good fights going on. So I was pleased with what we saw at Laguna Seca.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of individual on-track battles there across all three classes. The gaps alone wouldn't say that it was an extremely close race by any means. But I think this is a track that you can look at. Another one of those tracks on the IMSA schedule that's passing is a little bit of a premium here. And we did see, nonetheless, some great on-track action. Wasn't necessarily the cleanest race of all time, but overall, I would say it delivered as well.
Yeah. On to a couple of news pieces quickly.
Well, I got to answer a question in the chat here because we're still talking about Laguna Seca. Adrian Prado saying, Faf needs to keep that speed somehow, and why was James Hinchcliffe not in the Faf Borghini? Well, to answer the second one quickly is because it's not a Michelin Endurance Cup race. So Hinch was not in the car.
Yep.
Is he in the car for the 6-hour races?
I don't think he'll be there at Watkins Glen because isn't there a conflict with IndyCar that weekend? No, that's right after
Road America IndyCar would be that weekend.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah. And then I don't know if I would expect him in the car for Indianapolis, but Petit Le Mans, I would assume he'd be back in the car.
Last year it was just the 3 longest races, so I would expect that this year.
And yeah, I think, as you mentioned, this was a good race for Faf. They were just shy of the podium, as you mentioned, Stu. And a good sort of, they've been getting stronger each race. We'll give them that. Each race result this season has been stronger than the previous, and this is still a new car for that team.
Yeah.
So far, what we've seen from them running that new Lamborghini this year, hopefully They're able to find a race win with that car that they weren't able to find with the McLaren program last year. But so far, things are looking more promising for them.
Yeah, Laguna Seca seems to be a pretty strong track for FAF as a whole. I believe they finished second in this race last year. They had a strong running, and the year before that, when the Porsche wasn't that great, they also had a strong running here. So Laguna Seca seems to just suit the team, maybe if that's a thing.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think I'm all set for Laguna Seca. Everything we've discussed there. One quick note, actually, that IMSA Radio kept bringing up during the race. Ryan Marine, I think, was the one who noted this during the radio broadcast. Is we talk about not being able to convert race wins from pole position in IMSA. It's actually not been since Mosport of 2023, where we've seen the GTP pole sitter go through and actually win the race. And this is going to be the second year that we haven't had Mosport on the calendar in IMSA for the GTP class. So it shows you how long it's been since we've seen that. So I guess pole position, not the place to be if you're in the GTP class and you want to go off of recent trends.
Yeah, that was Meyershank Racing that did that as well that year. That was a good battle that they had in the closing laps.
And then another comment in here before we move on from Laguna Seca. Have we talked about DXDT yet? And no, we didn't talk about DXDT for this race, but it was actually the first race that we've had for that sprint lineup, the more full season sprint lineup of Alex Udell teamed up with Robert Wickens in that class as well. And I'm just trying to see where they finished in this race, but it wasn't a strong race or one that they're going to highlight at the end of the season, it looks like.
They were on the end of some unfortunate circumstances in the pits for their first pit stop of the race. They were coming into the pits. The 021 Ferrari was in the pit box already. They had just finished up service. They came out right into the path of the 36. They made contact, and the 36 ultimately was not able to get into their pit box to complete service. So they essentially completed a drive-through penalty that really kind of killed anything that they had in this one, which was unfortunate to see. The 021 was penalized for it, but it wasn't. It was unfortunate for DXTT, and the Corvettes showed not lightning pace this weekend, but they showed solid pace all weekend. So kind of another instance of DXTT falling on some just unfortunate luck here.
Yeah. Okay, and the only news piece I really wanted to discuss in this show, of course, we as we inch closer to the 24 Hours of Le Mans, we've started to get some more race liveries popping up, and we got some special race liveries, a couple of throwbacks that we're going to be seeing on track at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. We had Iron Lynx, the 3 Mercedes that we're going to be seeing at Le Mans this year, hoping to score some points for the first time this season, but given a big throwback to the Sauber C9 days when they won here in 1989 with the Silver Arrows racing in GT. It's Mercedes return to the 24 Hours of Le Mans for the first time since 1999. Hoping these cars can stay on the ground this time. But, three pretty good looking liveries. They're classic Mercedes liveries, as we've seen. Synonymous with their sports car programs in the past, but also if you want to look at Formula One as well, where they used to run the pure silver cars there as well. Proper Mercedes liveries across the board, and even has the accent colors to match the C9s that we saw back in 1989.
Yeah, this is when I think of a Mercedes, this is what I think of, just this iconic silver gray. This the true Silver Arrows. This is these cars look good. They're going to look really good under the lights, I think, as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And then my favorite, they did it. The number 7 Toyota running that throwback livery to the 1998 GT1 that we saw be very strong at the race that year, in 1999 as well. What a fantastic livery.
Yeah.
That's got to be one of my favorite sports car liveries, favorite throwback liveries in any series capacity of all time. And they are only running out in car number 7. They're sort of doing a dual past versus present thing, where car 8 will be running the primary standard black livery for Le Mans this year. They are celebrating their 40th anniversary at Le Mans this year, dating back to those early days with the Toyota TS010, and then up through the iterations of cars. We're on the 5th iteration now with the GR010. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. It's one of my favorite liveries. I've been hoping Toyota would do this for years now. And even when they first teased that they were going to be doing something special for their 40th anniversary, I specifically said, put the 1998 livery on the car. I think it's going to look incredible, and certainly lived up to those expectations for me.
You gonna look at getting a die cast of this one?
100%. 100%. Going to have it on the shelf.
Right on.
One of my complaints with Toyota, honestly, and the program has just been that the program has been a little bit too corporate. It's been a little too sanitized in the past, where team orders are pretty big at Toyota, and the liveries have been a little bit too corporate as well, too company colored. I'm really glad to see them sort of break the trend here a little bit. And of course, they've been breaking from that trend of being a little too corporate this season in general, with some of the comments we've gotten out of that team at the races as well. So nice to see them sort of break free from that a little bit. And got to be my favorite livery on track at Le Mans this year.
You wouldn't be talking about our favorite 3-letter word now, would you?
They're getting a little vocal about it. I was going to discuss it in this episode, but I think there's going to be plenty more to discuss in our Le Mans preview episode, so I'm going to save it for then.
I think that's wise. Do we got another question that we could answer before we kind of wrap things up on a more condensed episode this week? Do you think the 99 Proton Porsche could be more competitive? What do you think?
I do, for sure. It's been one of the things I've been thinking about this year. I was trying to pull up the race results from them for this season, and I might be able to get there.
I can tell you they finished last in this race.
Well, yeah, they certainly didn't have a race of Spa to remember. But yeah, to me, Proton had a couple of standout races, one of them being the 6 Hours of Spa last year, with Julian Andlauer in the car making some incredible overtakes that made the highlight reels. But this year, they just haven't really been in the picture. We haven't discussed them that much. And we talk about how strong Porsche 963 has been over in IMSA this year. The 963 in general hasn't really been a top car in the World Endurance Championship this year, even from the factory program. So for Proton, I would expect that as the factory car gets a little bit more pace, they, of course, will probably also be fighting a little bit harder as well. Really, when you look at the manufacturer, not the manufacturer, the World Cup for privateer teams, they're not really in the same league as the 83 Ferrari. I think the AF Corsa Ferrari pretty much has them beat across the board there, in terms of the amount of investing that they have in that program, the closeness that they have to the factory program, and the driver lineup as well in that car is really pretty close to being a proper factory lineup as well. To me, that's not really the fight for them to have. But that being said, they haven't been in the discussion really for much this season. And I would expect at some point things are going to change around for their way at some point.
You would certainly hope so, because it's been a rough go for them this year. Yeah. Definitely not the same level of, competitiveness that we saw out of Jota last year. And
right.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but
Also, can we have a clap for Earl Bamber for not crashing at Spa? We all know that third time's a charm. Yeah, there you go. Hey. We talked about that going into the race. The Cadillac has not been a big friend of Spa-Francorchamps, so they survived this one, and
They did.
unfortunately, we're not able to convert it to a podium, but nonetheless,
Hey,
showing
that's
up
a
at the
big step.
24 hours of Le Mans without having to rebuild a race car is a pretty good achievement, I'd say.
Yeah, or get a tub repaired.
Yeah. There was one other question earlier in the episode that I think sort of encapsulates this entire show, and I'll try to end this off with this one. If both Porsche and Ferrari are really hard to beat, both in IMSA and the WEC, do you see any correlation? I think if we compare and contrast the two programs right now, I think what we're seeing from Porsche this year, if I had to pick one, I think Porsche is a little bit more impressive. Just on the basis of really how flawless they've been in IMSA this year. We talked about the fact that this was their third 1-2 in a row, alongside that fourth win as well. You could definitely make the argument that there is more competition, quite a bit more competition in the hypercar class of the WEC than GTP and IMSA. But Porsche, to me, haven't had that ultimate pace that Ferrari has had in the WEC so far this season, but nonetheless have been able to turn those results around for race wins regardless. Ferrari, I know, of course, some people want to point fingers and say, oh, they've just been favored with balance of performance since race one this season. But with a couple of exceptions, you can't discredit the strategies that they're putting forward in their races as well. Talked earlier in the show about the 50 car, Nicholas Nielsen, and how strong his performance was in that final stint. To not bring that car in for an extra splash at the end and that salvaging P2 for them. I do think that team execution wise, these two teams are both very strong right now. Now, sports car racing is a double-sided sword, and I would expect that both of these manufacturers are not going to run away with the second half of the season quite as easily as they have the beginning. But I don't know. Do you have any additional things to throw on there?
No, I think you kind of covered it there. At the end of the day, like, you can argue BOP, you can argue a lot of things, but AF Corsa, Penske, like, these are both really strong organizations as well, that have winning records in racing. So, there's strong teams partnered up with a strong car are expected to do, incredible things. And I think both of those teams are delivering on that to this point. So, yeah, it's not going to stay like this forever. We know it's not going to stay like this forever. Sports car racing has funny ways of, leveling everything out. So I think, on to the next race for both championships. And, we know that Ferrari and Porsche both have big targets on their back.
And also really what it highlights is the cream rises to the top when you're talking about these programs in sports car racing, because really AF Corsa and Team Penske didn't get off to the strongest start in both of their classes when they started out in 2023. Porsche had a disastrous Rolex 24 in 2023, and it took a little bit of time for them to get their wheels on the ground. 2024, of course, double championships in both. Not a double championship meaning team or driver and manufacturer in the WEC, but a double championship in IMSA and the manufacturer's title over in the World Endurance Championship last year. They've certainly found their pace there and have continued that strength over in IMSA this year, where they're already definitely championship favorites. Yeah. And likewise for AF Corsa, with that exception of the Le Mans win in 2023, had some disappointing results in there as well. Last year at Imola, had that strategy blunder that they got pointed at all season long and said they blew a 1-2-3. This year, they rebound from that. What do? They go ahead and win that race. So what we've seen from both of those teams really is them come of age. And they're at a point right now where they're equally as strong as what we used to consider the undisputed top contenders in both championships. I think really Toyota is the one that stands out in the World Endurance Championship. And in IMSA, I suppose it's not quite as easy to point to one that was as dominant previously.
Yep. And as kind of to wrap up that thought, as El Noob has kind of alluded to here, he says, though seriously is a good surprise seeing Alpine being competitive after many years. Hope they win more. Yeah, you see manufacturers that are also stepping up despite the dominance, of course. There's still opportunities for these other manufacturers to step up. And could it be an Alpine that takes down Ferrari? Could it be a Peugeot that takes down Ferrari? It's all, we don't know what we're going to see in the next race. It's just as much anyone's game in this upcoming race, 24 Hours of Le Mans, as it's ever been.
Absolutely. And we're going to have plenty of time to highlight and preview all of that coming up soon. We've got one show in between now and then, which will be 2 weeks from now, to preview the IMSA sprint race, the hour and 40 sprint race on the streets of Detroit, which should be very interesting. We'll see if race standards come into play at that race as well.
Thankfully, the name of that race is shorter.
Yeah, there we go. June will be, of course, a very action-packed month across the board in sports car racing. We don't just have action in IMSA and the WEC. We have 3 24-hour races coming up in June with Le Mans, Nürburgring, and the 24 Hours of Spa. We've got the 6 hours at the Glen over in IMSA, and got plenty of that to cover on the show. So do follow the podcast on a podcasting platform and get subscribed to the YouTube channel if you do not want to miss any of that. We will be there to cover as much of that as we possibly can. And I'll leave it at that for tonight. Stu, do you have any closing thoughts?
Nope. Just Faf wasn't at fault. Leave Faf alone.
Leave Faf alone. And we'll hope to see you guys in 2 weeks' time for another episode of the Rain Race Podcast to preview even more races to come soon. Hope to see you all there. Take care.